The gold meetings, as we're calling them, were often attended by Mr Youssef, is that right?
I don't have the attendance list in front of me, but yes,
Broadly,
that would have been the case when he was Health Secretary, yes.
And often attended by Ms Lloyd?
There would have been a special advisor in them and officials there and somebody from my private office.
If their position at this inquiry were that the gold meetings were a decision-making body, would they be wrong about that?
Yes, the gold meetings were not. Cabinet was the decision-making body.
How was the list of attendees decided? I think you said that Mr Youssef would attend in one role, but perhaps not in another.
It would depend on the nature of the decision that we were about as Cabinet to consider. So that would vary depending on the state, the stage of the pandemic and the state of things that we were dealing with at the time. So sometimes that would be very health focused, particularly later as we go into 2021, when finance to support our public health decisions was becoming more of an issue. That would include finance. I was, again, at the committee's request, reviewing the inquiry, request reviewing some of these papers over the course of yesterday. So, for example, at late 2020, there were meetings that Ms Forbes, as I think she said yesterday, wasn't at, but her office was copied in to the notice of the meeting and the papers. The Economy Secretary, Fiona Hislop at the time, was at these meetings. Later in 2021, when finance was much more of an issue, Ms Forbes would be in attendance and perhaps another minister might not be. These were discursive opportunities for us to throw around issues. Well, firstly, to look at the state of the pandemic, the data, what we were dealing with, the choices and the decisions that we were having to take, what the implications of those decisions were, what factors we had to take account of in order that all of the proper work could be done to then shape and inform the decisions that Cabinet would take. To
be clear about Ms Forbes' evidence, her position was that she did not attend any meetings in 2020. In fact, she didn't even know of the existence of the Gold Group in 2020.
I obviously cannot say what information was shared with her at that time about these meetings with the private office, but having reviewed some of these papers last night, and I will apologise and be corrected if I've read this wrongly, her office was copied into the papers and the notification of meetings at the end of 2020.
But she didn't attend in 2020?
She wasn't in attendance in 2020. I don't think it would be true to say that her office didn't know about these meetings. Had she known, and obviously from her evidence yesterday she didn't know, but had she and had wanted to attend, there would have been nothing to stop her attending. But in those meetings at the end of 2020, I believe that the Economy Secretary was present because at that point, as we've reflected earlier on, issues around hospitality, the impact and the burden on businesses was one of the issues that we were frequently discussing and reflecting on.
These meetings presented discursive opportunities, as you've described them, at which Ms Forbes, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, did not participate. Is that correct?
She did not participate in all of the meetings, no.
She didn't participate in any of the meetings in 2020?
I think there were probably only... I think there were only few meetings in the latter part of 2020. I don't have the list in front of me right now, but I believe that these meetings, these gold meetings, started in perhaps September, October 2020. So I don't think there were very many meetings in 2020. She wouldn't, from her evidence yesterday, she wasn't there. She was at meetings in 2021. There was no, this was as I think you're demonstrating in your questioning, it was a reasonably fluid group in order that we had the right people around the table to sort of throw around the issues that we were discussing in order to inform decisions at Cabinet. Of course, Ms Forbes, with all other Cabinet Secretaries, would have been at Cabinet when the actual decisions came to be taken and would have been and did make their views known and contribute fully to those discussions and take part in the decisions.
As she wasn't there, she obviously wasn't one of the right people to have round the table, was that right?
No, that is, well, she was there when we got into 2021 when finance became more of an issue. That is not the basis on which I operated at any time over my period as First Minister, and certainly not during the pandemic. All I was interested in was having around the table the people that we needed to inform the decisions that we were taking. And when those decisions failed to be taken, all of the Cabinet were there. My only motivation at any point during the pandemic was to do the best we could to keep the country as safe as possible. Sometimes we would have succeeded in that, other times we didn't. And I carry the regret for the occasions that we didn't all the time, and always will do. But the motivation was just to try to take the best possible decisions we could.
Could we go to INQ 000346141, please? This is some notes taken by Ms Lloyd. You may recognise the handwriting. From the 28th of September 2020. And in these notes, she says, the Gold Command, and she refers to, let's find the page. It's the next page I think I want to look at, if that's okay. Yeah, just the passage at the top, which is obviously in that context. Navigate economy, avoid blunt instrument. FH, no finances. FM, starting point, how do we reduce impact of spread with minimal economic impact? Political tactics, calling for things we can't do to force UK. This is a Gold Command meeting that Ms Forbes was not at. Is that your understanding?
Yes, FH will be Fiona Hislop.
Yes, Ms Hislop was. That's my understanding as well. This is a meeting in which there is a discussion about important financial matters relating to how we would reduce the financial impact of possible restrictions that were being contemplated at that time. Is that correct?
That certainly is how it appears from what's in front of me.
Again, to contextualise this, just to make sure we're literally on the same page, but my understanding of this period is that this is a period when cases have risen. You made an announcement on the 7th of September that you would have to slow down the easing of the lockdown. There was advice being given in this month by SAGE and others within the Scottish Government as well that there may need to be a circuit breaker. And I think what the context of this discussion, just so we're understanding each other, is that there was consideration of what the economic situation would be if we had another lockdown, in particular whether there would be funding for business and for furlough and that sort of thing. Is that, again, broadly your understanding of this period?
Yes.
We discussed this, I think, with Ms Lloyd, in particular the part where she talks about political tactics calling for things we can't do to force UK. What was the reference there? Do you recall?
Well, this was during a period as we are sort of September through the autumn of 2020, which culminated in the second lockdown in England, enhanced measures in Scotland, but not full lockdown. And it was at that point, it became much more of an issue as we went into 2021. But this was at the point where this issue, which I spoke about very often at the time, and which no doubt we'll speak about later today, was starting to come to the fore of a disjoint between the ability of the Scottish Government and the responsibility of the Scottish Government to take public health decisions, but our inability to borrow the money or raise the money to compensate businesses or individuals for the impact of those decisions. When such decisions were taken by the UK Government for England, they could provide the financial support. And this was a frustration that was expressed by us regularly, and also by the First Ministers of Wales and the First Minister and Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. That is, again, these are not my words, they're not my notes, but we often, not often, that would be putting it too strongly, but this was the start at which we were experiencing a situation where we were not managing to persuade the UK Government privately, and therefore we were having to contemplate airing some of these issues publicly.
I think that did happen, Ms Sturgeon. I think you made an announcement in this regard about what the situation was. In fact, the 1st of November, just a few days after this, which then on the very same day led the then Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to respond saying that furlough would be available in the event of a further Scottish and indeed Welsh or Northern Irish lockdown.
I don't think we ever, in fact, I'm not sure to this day we ever got the actual pinned down detail of what that meant, whether it would be 80% furlough for as long as a Scottish lockdown lasted, or whether it was just a sweeping statement to...
To be clear, that this wasn't, in fact, it was slightly late. It was the
this was November, this was earlier than that.
Yes, this was September.
I'm just trying to illustrate what this was. It was a time when these frustrations were beginning to surface, which hadn't been there in terms of the financial aspect of this up until now, where, I mean, this was, to be blunt, this was about making sure, the Scottish Government seeking to make sure that if we had to apply tougher restrictions or impose another lockdown, Scottish workers would get their wages paid, Scottish businesses would be compensated for that in the same way that the UK Government would be able to make possible for individuals and businesses in England. And that's what that is, I believe that is what that is referring to.
Ms Forbes told us that prior to and around this time, she had been involved in considerable discussions with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury around this and other financial issues. This was a discussion in which she should have participated, is it not?
It may have been. If what is being put to me, and forgive me for if I'm reading into things that are not there, but if what is being put to me is that Ms Forbes was somehow being excluded from discussions that she should have been party to, then that is absolutely not the case. Ms Forbes was an extremely highly valued member of my cabinet, an extremely competent and professional member of my cabinet. If she, any discussion she would have been having with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury would have been properly reported to me and through the government. There, were many different meetings at many different levels within the Scottish Government at which different ministers and cabinet secretaries and officials would have participated. Fiona Hislop, and we at that time had a finance secretary and an economy secretary. She was there that day clearly to represent the broader business financial interests. And I'm sure, again, you'll be able to check whether I'm right or wrong on this by reference to the corporate record, is that if there had been issues raised there that required answers or considerations around financial impact, then Ms Forbes' office would have been contacted and she would have been part of wider discussions. I did not operate on any issue at any point of the COVID pandemic in a way that sought to exclude people from decision making. I tried to lead from the front. I tried to shoulder my fair share, sometimes deliberately more than my fair share of the burden of decision making, given the severity and the difficulty of the decisions that were being made. I thought that was appropriate for a First Minister. Unlike Cabinet Secretaries who have their own portfolios, I also had a responsibility to see the whole picture. But I tried to use the best resources I had available, ministerially and in the civil service, for the Scottish Government in the whole to reach the best decisions. And, I absolutely accept that it's the case that we can look at a single note of a single meeting and look at, well, a particular person wasn't at that, and reflect now. So I am sitting here thinking, I don't know why she wasn't there that day, and probably she should have been, but that was not some deliberate attempt to exclude her. On the contrary, she was crucial to the pandemic response in many ways.
Well, we have her evidence on that matter.